Welcome, everyone. My name is Steve Taplin here with Garth Goggin. We're here to talk about today on this LinkedIn Live event, Beyond the Resume, how to hire top tier software engineers in the current market. And let's be real, hiring in tech has changed, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does come with some new challenges. Traditional coding tests can be gamed by AI. Soft skills and leadership are harder than ever to measure remotely, and we need to assess thinking, not just typing. At Sonatafy, we've reimagined the process. We have a proprietary SaaS platform that we call Nexus, and we have over 13,000 engineers out of Latin America that are part of our community. And what Nexus does for our company is it ensures everyone follows a consistent, structured process, and we constantly keep our community of engineers engaged with where we see engineers screw up on interviews and tips and tricks and how company interviews will ask you different things. And our goal is to prepare our community to be able to ask and be able to interview their best. So hiring is evolved. Let's show you how to do it. I'm going to turn this over to Garth, who is the CTO of Sonatafy Technology. Garth, what are you? I know you have some very strong thoughts on this matter. Take it away.
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting things we want to talk about first is, really defining what we talk about when we say the top engineering talent, or people like to say the top 1% of engineers, or however that looks like, right? And
There's definitely a lot of buzzwords out there for that.
right, yeah. So let's talk first about like what that actually means. And for me, when I'm hiring, whether that is in a past life when I was, a VP of engineering, or now for Sonify, I'm not necessarily looking for the single best person or engineer that we would rate, right? I'm thinking about who is the best person that can complete the work that needs to be done, and do it, fit in well with the organization. And when we think of it more holistically like that, it becomes we start thinking about the hiring process a little bit differently as well, right? So not just I've worked with a lot of really smart engineers that can do a lot of really great technical things that, uh, to be honest, weren't great employees, could never meet a deadline, and all these types of things that didn't really help the business as much as their engineering prowess might have been able to if they were better at these other things. So that, to me, that's what a top engineer is: someone that really brings a ton of business value. Um, so I think there's two ways we can kind of think about it. Maybe not two ways, but two things I like to think about when we are hiring people. So one is, they have to meet the technical standard for the role. And what that role, that's going to be different for every single role, right? Sometimes we have different levels of engineer. So obviously the technical standard we need for a mid-level engineer is different than a staff engineer. Yeah, so the technical level there has to be a minimum level that person has to meet. We have to have a good way of measuring that, and we have to define that well, right? Also, what is the role, right? Are we a SaaS app that is basically just an interface for the database that it's basically just a CRUD app? Because that person may not, a senior engineer at that company may not need the same kind of technical prowess, so to speak, of someone that is a senior engineer at a video streaming company that uses AI, right? And so, what that looks like, it's important to understand what your needs are, and making sure you're hiring the talent that is correct from a technical. So defining what that minimum level of talent is and how you're going to measure for that is really
Garth,
important. Yeah.
the best software engineers I've ever met are genius level people who don't necessarily have the best social skills. They put their headphones on and solve engineering challenges. They can be the best out there, but they're not always the best at interviewing and being able to be on the spot to verbalize how they would attack problems. And this creates a real challenge in figuring out the right engineering talent.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that the number one thing is the technical. They have to meet that minimum bar, right? And then the second part is, and equally important, is the soft skills that we need this person to have. And we call them soft skills, but really, I think a better way to think of them is they're the hard to measure skills we need this person to have, right? And
I like that a lot better than saying soft skills.
yeah, soft skills makes people kind of like, well, I don't, and really, it's this is the harder part of hiring, which is why so many people are like, oh, I don't care about that as much. Well, yeah, it's because it's harder and you don't want to do it. That's why you're saying that. So, what I like to, so the technical part, we want to, I think one of the most important things is we are not coming, we don't want to give ourselves too much credit. And what I see a lot of companies do is say, hey, we have this technical test that doesn't mimic at all what we're going to do, but we're going to decide how good you are at what I'm going to ask you to do based on this other thing that isn't like that at all. And then people will say things like, well, I'm going to see how this person thinks, I'm going to see how they problem solve. But the reality is most likely the people doing the hiring on your team aren't professional psychologists and can't really evaluate these things as well as they pretend, right? And can't take apart how someone's thinking about a problem. So it's for the technical part, right? If you were um you know you want to see, can they do the skill. So one of the things I really like to do is have a PR ready to go, bring the person in live and have that person do a review of the code, of some code, in front of me, and then have them review that and have them talk out like what they're going to do, and I can see what kind of comments they leave, what problems they see, um and I can find out a lot about how they go through that process. I can also see really easily, do they understand this code, can they read the code. If you can read the code and understand what's going on, then now I'm not measuring your ability to memorize syntax, or like, did you do a bunch of leak code in the past and were you just really good at that. I'm actually measuring, can you do, and that is something, if you can do that, then that's like a skill that I actually need you to do at the job. That's super important.
So Garth, and when I look at what we did as a company 6 months ago versus 2 years ago versus last week, it keeps evolving based on things.
Mhm.
And we've kind of gotten away from the live code test. What are your thoughts and how you go about, looking at how they would do the PR? Do you like take home tests where then they have to explain their logic to you? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so for this particular example, and there's tons of different ways things you could do. The PR is just one example, right? So if they're doing a review, I would like to do that review live, and they can tell me, what they're thinking, and I can ask them questions. I can see what kind of comments they're leaving, and this tells me a lot of things, right? I can see when they're leaving a comment, how do they write their comment? Do they make sure to be really respectful in comments, right? When you give someone feedback asynchronously, how you write that message is super important. So I can not only measure them on their technical ability, but now I'm starting to measure them on some of their soft skills, like how good is your async communication, which is super important in an async world, in a remote world where we're all, giving this async feedback constantly to each other. So that's super important. And then,
Let me interject
yeah,
there, Gar. So when I look at, we have over 215 people on this webinar. Most of them are tech leaders, but I see some CEOs and founders as well. And so when you're going through how they go about their problem solving, are they doing that beforehand and explaining it to you, or doing it live?
yeah. So I'm doing it. So I think you can do it either way, right? So, I like to do it live because, and I'll tell you why. But I think you can have the person do it beforehand and then explain it to you in session. So either one works. I would say I like to do it live because I feel like I'm pretty good at getting getting people to calm down and feel comfortable and this kind of thing. And that's a really important skill when you're interviewing. If people are really nervous, et cetera, you're not actually testing how good they are, you're testing how well they deal with interviews, right? But if you can have the good skill of calming people down and making them feel comfortable, then you can um test their actual skills. Now, if you feel like that's not something that's your strong suit, then doing this as a take home and then having that conversation, it might be better. And really, the ideal here, I think, is to offer both and just leave it up to the candidate which one they would do, because either one I think works, right? And
Gotcha.
then it's about getting, because you want to see the candidate, you want to give the candidate the best opportunity to show off, and so you want to make it comfortable for them.
Makes
Is
sense.
how I view that. Yeah.
So
So
we've
you
determined
go ahead.
that traditional technical interview styles are broken. There's definitely a disconnect out there, and everybody thinks they're great at hiring, and we know, who wants to admit they suck at it. They're going to lose their job if they admit they suck at it. And as we see, a lot of companies will often have a set process they go through, but this is a fireside chat where we get real. A lot of it is a cover my ass process versus an actual real process to get to it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that's very true. I think a lot of it is about the technical ability, and a lot of it is okay. A lot of it is about the HR process, the interview loop, et cetera, right? But I think there's a whole nother process that needs to happen where we decide, what we're looking for, what's really important, how are we going to measure those things. So the way I like to think about this is we define what are the skills that this person needs to have, right? Must haves and nice to haves, right? And this includes every not just technical, but also our hard to measure skills, right? And then we prioritize the must haves, right? And we separate those into things that are coachable and things that are hard to coach, right? So a thing that's coachable is maybe this person is a little bit younger, they're fresh out of college, and they don't really know how to act professionally yet, and we see that often in interviews. But we can coach them about that, right? Just showing up on time and having your camera on and all these kind of things, right? We can teach them a little bit how to be professional. What's hard to teach is do you really like coding, right? Do you have a strong work ethic? Those are things that are really hard to coach, and so you want to really hire for these hard to coach items, not the things that you can coach a person to do. So you take these items now you have that are must haves, that are hard to coach, and those are the things you really want to look for in hiring. Um, and then you want to create a plan for how you're going to test for those certain things, and that's, I think, a lot of people kind of do the steps up to that point, maybe not even super intentionally, but at least they're kind of doing it. The hard part is, okay, so we want to find someone that's has a really good work ethic. How are we going to test for that? Well, that's really hard to test for in an
Yes, it
interview,
is.
right? So uh, this is, I think, an area where, when it comes to hiring, this is where if you're good at having a conversation with the person and talking to them, you can find out some things, right? So some of the people that I've hired in the past and things that I'll look for is, can they give me a hobby or something they've done in their past that shows that they're willing to put in a lot of work to become really good at something, right? So some examples of this of people where, I hired someone that he seemed like he was a pretty good engineer. He wasn't elite, but he was a pretty good engineer when I hired him. Um, but I knew that he had a master's in musical theory or something. He was a really, really good musician. And I know to become that level of musician, he had to put in a ton of work over time, right? So he knew what it meant to put in a ton of work and not see immediate results and get same thing with another gentleman I hired. He was pretty much a junior when I hired him, but he was a bodybuilder. And that guy, I know, he knew he had to go to the gym, he had to eat, he had to eat right all the time, and he saw very low to little results on a day-to-day basis, right? And eventually, though, so he knew that he had to put in the work to get where he wanted to go, and he
I have
definitely did.
never met a good coder who's a bodybuilder. Does that really exist?
Yeah, this guy is definitely, now he's an excellent engineer.
Because
Um,
when we sit in front of our computers for 15 hours a day, it gets harder to lift those weights.
Yeah. So he is, but anyway, you want people, you want to look for things in their past, or maybe it's just how they talk about things, that they understand that it takes a lot of work and it's ongoing work, right? To be good at something, to be really elite at something, you have to put in a lot of work, and we want people that are willing to do that and understand what that means. Not everybody talks about working hard. Not everybody really understands what it means to work hard, and we
That's
want those people
true.
that really understand what it means.
Now, Garth,
So,
so how often do you see superstar coders that get rejected because they're not good test performers?
yeah, so that's interesting. I think that that definitely happens a lot, right? Especially in today's environment, because companies have so many choices and there's a lot of applicants and stuff. But I think what is actually a bigger problem is the real superstars, the real people that can really change your organization. If you have tests that are maybe not necessary, or your interview process is broken, they don't really want to come work for your company. They're not going to take the test at all, right? And they're going to go, because that's the first red flag when you go work at a company and they're like, oh, we have all these tests and they have nothing to do with the job. And it's like, all right, well, I see how this company operates. I'm not going to do that, right? And
You
those
mean
people go
to
work somewhere
attract
else.
top engineering talent, you have to make sure it's catered to them?
Right, 100%. Yes.
Uh,
So when you
uh,
stop thinking about hiring engineers like hiring, and you think of it more like recruiting, like, oh, I can identify this person, I'm going to sell them on coming to, like, to applying at my job for my job. The first thing they're going to ask you is, what is the interview process? And if the interview process, well, we have 7 technical interviews, all with 14 people in them, and you got to meet all these other people after you do the technical, they're going to be like, oh, I'm not interested in that, right? But if you tell them, hey, so we have this one technical interview, we just got to make sure that our bases are covered, and then you're going to meet with our, our vice president of engineering, our CTO or whatever, and then you'll probably meet with our, maybe our founder or whatever, depending on the size of the company, as kind of a formality. Then that's it. Then that's something they can live with, right? And that's something they understand, they appreciate that. And I've definitely been able to hire a lot of engineers at companies that I've worked with, because I approach them. I know they're really good engineers, either through someone or because I met them at a group or something like that. And then I could be like, hey, you want to come work here? Usually the answer is no, but one day they have a bad day at work or something like that, and they know, hey, I can go work at Garth's company, because and it's not going to be a huge problem for me, right? And that's really important.
so what
It's a
about
big recruiting tool.
when you're doing PR reviews versus traditional code tests? Have you ever been surprised positively or negatively on how good someone can perform on one versus the other?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So with a traditional code test, and I've taken a lot of them as an engineer myself, and I've also taken, I've given them when I wasn't in control of and a lot of people who are really good engineers don't necessarily do well on code tests, because it's a little bit of a different skill, right? Um, Whereas a review is something we do all the time, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be a review either. I know one company I was at, we did they just had me kind of, they were building basically a CRUD app. So they had me build a CRUD app, which I'm not a huge fan of either, because it took a lot of time, but I really wanted that job. So maybe that was one of the things they were filtering for. But it was doing the thing that I was going to be doing in the job is the main thing that we're testing for there. And
And
uh,
so, Garth, we just had a comment come in from an anonymous LinkedIn user, and that's okay. But this is really funny. He said, once during a live coding test, I jokingly said, it's funny how these tests rarely have to do with the day-to-day work. And the company said, yeah, I hate them too. Yeah, they were
Yeah,
still.
so it's super common. This isn't like my special insight. Everybody knows this already, and it continues. And companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon, they can do this because they're paying, incredible salaries, whatever. So they can do whatever they want because they have that carrot at the end, right? But if you're not paying $500,000 a year, you need to have other ways to recruit people. And recruiting through having a really good hiring process is part of it. And yeah, I think this is not some unique insight. Every engineer has experienced this for sure, and every person that's managed at multiple companies has experienced this. And so I think one of the other things that's really important that I wanted to touch on was, so we come up with ways to understand how to measure. How are we going to train these hard to find things, like work ethic, right? And what's super important is, as a VP of engineering or CTO, you're not going to be able to do every interview, right? You want your team to be on the interview loop, et cetera. So you need to um, train how to do these things as well, right? And one of the things that's most important that I learned early was picking the right people for interviews is just as important for getting the good talent. And a lot of times the best engineers are not the people that you want doing the interviews. You want people that are the most empathetic people on your team, right? The people that can do a good job of helping the interviewee feel comfortable, the people that can understand, they can see what's um they've been in those shoes recently, and they can help the person through, and they can then understand how well is this person going to collaborate, for instance, right? I've been in a lot of interviews with senior engineers at companies, and then once I got into those companies, realized like that person's not really that nice. Like, why would we pick that person to represent the company? Like, when you're interviewing, you're also recruiting. And if the person doing the interview is like not nice or not representing your company the way that like, that's a big deal. That's so those top people that you really want to come work at your company, you want to make an impression on. It's a two-way interview. And if it's not a two-way interview, if you're thinking, oh, well, they really need the job more than I need them, then you're not really going after the best talent you could. You're going after the talent down here where you should be going after right. That if
That's
you're
a good
not, if you
point.
don't have that problem, you're not going after high enough talent is the problem.
Now, if you're a rock star engineer and you want to rise to be at the CTO level, Garth, like you are now, you kind of have to learn how to interview, don't you?
Yeah, for sure. But most engineers don't necessarily want that, right? Um, I like a lot of engineers want to just code and kind of move up that separate track. And those engineers still need to learn how to interview as well, right? So if you say, well, I don't want to be in management, or I don't want to take the management track, being able to interview is still an important skill, right? So um learning the empathy, and this is something that I have always done throughout my career. Even when I'm not looking for a job, I still go do interviews, both to see how other people are doing it, but also I want to remember what that is like, being in that position. Because when you interview with someone and they have like a really hard technical challenge, like I feel like I'm a pretty good engineer, and sometimes I feel like really incompetent during that time, during that hour or 2 hours or whatever it is. And it's important to remember that what that feels like, right?
Well,
And
Garth,
yeah.
that's a great skill you have picked up, and I've seen this in a lot of aspects of how you go about business. That all right, so you're interviewing with other companies just to hear their process and understand what they're doing. I know that before we go on client meetings, you're usually calling up the company and asking for a quote or looking at what they're doing. How did you these when you say it out loud? It sounds so easy on how to stay on
Mhm.
top of your game. But how did you develop these skills? Because those are true signs of a leader that's constantly staying on top of trends.
So I think we've talked about empathy and how important empathy is, and empathy is really about it's not about sympathy or having compassion, or it's about understanding, the intellectual understanding of the feelings the other person is having. And a lot of people are like, oh, I have really good empathy or whatever, but your empathy, if that's the definition of empathy, and it is, like, you can only have as much empathy as your intellectual understanding goes, right? So if you're not doing the research, your empathy can't be that good, right? If you're just going with the information you already have, like, that's your limit to empathy. So gathering more information allows you to be more empathetic to what your audience is, whether it be a client meeting or whether it be someone you're interviewing, you are going to be able to get more out of whatever you're doing the more research you put into it, into that person's position. And that's a super important skill, not just in pretty much anything you do. You always want to be respectful of people's time, so you don't want to do that too much. But that's
I know when as we deal with as many clients as we do at Sonatafy, one of the common themes we see with our clients, not only are they looking for top engineers, but they're looking for people when workload is low that will proactively go out and find stuff to do and look for challenges to solve. How do you that's a hard ability to test for during an interview process. How do you go about that?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. It's again one of those things
Thank you.
it's
Every
hard.
once in a while, I ask a good one.
Yeah, good question. Yeah. So interesting. So I'll give you an example of how I've seen that in interviews in the past. It's something you kind of just have to look for. It's not something you can necessarily test for. But that same person I was talking about, that was a musician that I hired, I remember doing his interview. It was so long ago. It's funny I remember it. But it was like a coding exercise. We were doing some kind of crud exercise, and I was asking him to do some things. And as he was doing the things I was asking him, so there was already a bunch of code and he was like debugging basically, right? So I was asking him to fix the problem. As he was doing that, he was also refactoring other things to make it, and he would tell me why, right? It had nothing to do with the test. It had, it was just like, he was like, yo, we could also do this better. And he would do that, right? And he's like, we could also do this better. That takes a probably, and he just wanted things to be better. And I think that skill, what you're asking about, is people that are curious. They have the knowledge, obviously, to know what they should be working on, that could be better. But also it's about a desire to always want to be improving. And it's kind of something you just have to look for more than you have to contest for it, right? A lot of people like to ask behavioral questions, but we've all been trained now on how to answer behavioral questions, so it's not as effective, right? So the real thing is to just do the behaviors, right? What behaviors am I looking for, and can I see that? So are you going to see all of them? No. But I would say, to that end, Steve, that's something you want to hire for as much as possible. But I think that's a cultural thing about a team. If you get a team where you can have, like, that guy was good at it, right? And you show him, and then you as a leader positively reinforce that, and then you get other people to do it, you positively reinforce that. So that's something you can build into. That's one of the coachable things. I would put that under a coachable, is kind of what I'm getting at. I wouldn't say that's a non-coachable quality.
And so, with that said, you're saying it's just as important of the engineering leadership to promote those behaviors within the team versus just expecting everyone to do it.
Yeah. You have to coach it. You have to make it part of your culture. I think for things like work ethic and things like that, that's really hard to coach, because it's that's got to be coached into you when you're almost like a kid or something, right? But as far as like what are we going to do when we don't have a ticket to work on right now? Like, that's something that we can coach. And so yeah, we have to be good at identifying what's coachable, what's not coachable. And part of it may be you as a leader, right? I know how to coach this. I don't know how to coach this. So that takes some looking at ourselves.
So, Garth, you've had hundreds of engineers report up through you and your organizations. How have you trained engineers to be better interviewers and better at evaluating soft skills?
Yeah. So this is the hardest part, I think, of when you start to scale. It is not easy, and there's no magic bullet, so to speak. I think what it really comes down to is the people that were best at it, that I found, were people that I interviewed that kind of went through, and then I would explain to them, like, okay, do you remember the interview we did? This is why I did that. This is why I did that. This is why I did that. And then they go, oh, I see why you did these things, right? So they understand that, right? And then I would start to do some interviews with them where they would sit in, and then I would review the interview with them of why I did all the things, right? And then I would have them do some. And then we would again review, and I would kind of basically what I'm saying is it's hard, but the only real way you can learn is through experience, because unfortunately with these hard to measure skills or soft skills, it is really about experience, right? And can you understand what a person is going to look like, or how good at you going to be, not look like, but how they're going to act once they're on the job based on the experience, right? And this is something I don't think it takes a lot of interviews, but it takes a fair amount to be good at that, and you get better and better at it.
What are some tactics that you'd recommend that people interviewing engineers could start employing ASAP?
Yeah, so I think the number one most important thing that I learned, that I had to learn, and that I've taught people, it's not necessarily a tactic, but I think it's super important, is to trust your gut, right? If you feel like someone, oh, they passed the interview and they look like these things, but they don't really seem like, there seems like, trust your gut, right? And also sometimes it goes the other way. Sometimes I've had people do really bad on the technical part, and they seem, but anyway, so really, like that experience part, that's where that experience part is really valuable. What we have to be careful there is understanding our own biases, right? Because if we're trusting our gut, then our own bias can get in the way. So you have to understand, like, okay, well, is my gut telling me yes just because that person likes the same things that I do, and they look similar to me, and so that's why I really like this person? You have to ask yourself these questions. You have to be honest with yourself, otherwise that can hurt your team. So, but ultimately, I think, we're hiring for a position that is takes a lot of it's a hard thing to do. It's a lot of creativity, right? And it's hard to judge how someone's going to be with creativity and work ethic and all these soft skills that go into being a good software engineer. And so when we have to kind of lean on our experience and who we've seen do it, and and I think that's why I think we don't like to say that, because HR doesn't like it when we say that, because that sound right. But whether we say that to HR or not, that's what we're doing. And so what we want to do is, because we're going to do that anyway, right? We want to make sure that we're doing that well, right? Everybody likes to, again, going back to your comment about everybody likes to CYA, right? They like to have, like, okay, we're going to be completely subjective about this. Like, really, you're going to meet with someone for an hour, and then you're going to give them a number, and now it's subjective because you give them a number. Like, that's not subjective now, right? So it's always a something that we're going to make a judgment on. And some of it does come down to how much we like the person, but that is important. We got to work with them every day, right? You want to find out, do the rest of the team like the person? And then also, is it, does the person, yeah. So anyway, so some of it is that experience. As far as real tactical things, we really want to find what it is that the person is, those non-negotiable skills, find a way to measure for that as well as possible. And that really has to do with the empathy that we have, right? So another non-negotiable skill that I think is a non-negotiable and non-coachable skill is taking feedback. It's really hard to coach someone to take good feedback. It sounds like a coachable skill, but if they're not good at taking feedback, then it's really hard to coach them. So it's right. So this to me is always so the way I do this is actually really simple. In their interview, I will find something that they did correctly, that is kind of like almost an obvious they did it correctly, and I will challenge them on it, right? So it's something that I don't want it to be something that they feel like, oh, I might be wrong on this. I want it to be something that they feel like, oh yeah, no, I know I did this right. And that's on purpose. I want to find out, like, a couple of things. I want to find out, when I give them feedback, how are they going to react, right? And then I also want to find out, are they willing to say, oh, I hear what you're saying, but I think what I did do is right. Like, are they going to push back on me? And again, a lot of that you can't do this at the beginning of the interview, right? You have to do this once you've built up that they're comfortable and that you have some amount of trust with them in the interview and all of that, right? So once you have some comfort in the interview, now when they say, now I say, hey, the way you did this, I think that should be done differently. What do you think about doing it this way? And I'm going to give them feedback and tell them that it should be done a different way. That's probably not correct, and see how they react, right? If
All
they just
right,
go,
that's a good
oh,
one.
you're right, I'm going to do it that other way, like that's not what I want in an engineer, right? Um, and then also I'm going to, so this is this goes back to, like, I'm not asking them about a time that they got feedback and how, right? That's a behavioral question that's pointless, I think. But instead I'm actually giving them feedback and seeing, so I'm doing I'm actually looking at their behaviors, and keeping in mind that these behaviors that they're in an interview, so they know that they're on their best behavior. So you have to take the things that they do negative and multiply that by 10, and the things that they do positive, divide that by 10, right? Because that's how they're more like how they're going to act.
So, what are some subtle red flags you look for when you're interviewing an engineer to assess their character, their collaboration? What are kind of those little things you look for, whether it's if they're looking away, if they're moving around a lot? How do you go about that?
Yeah. So for me, especially in engineering, like, it's not sales, right? So to me, like, how they interact from a personality basis, or how their social skills are, I don't put a ton in that, right? How they treat other people is super important. I've had a lot of engineers work for me that don't have great social skills, but they're still really kind people, really respectful people. So that's super important. So that's a red flag for me, right? If somebody doesn't, they don't have to have great social skills, but if they don't know how to communicate in a kind or respectful way, um, that's super important to me. And because ultimately, your code base is only going to be as good as people collaborate, right? So, you want to write this great quality code base. If people aren't collaborating well, then your PRs aren't going to work well, and now you don't have a good quality code base, right? So you have to have that. People have to be able to give each other feedback in a good, respectful environment. And if you don't have that, then you're not going to have the code base you want.
Gotcha.
Um,
Gareth,
yeah.
let's take a question.
Mhm.
This is from Sean Pissarro, who is a genius engineer, architect, and software development leader who I know personally. And he asked a good question here around methods for incorporating company core values into the interview process, and kind of who should do what when you're doing that. What are your thoughts on this, Garth?
Yeah. So I think that this is a really good question, kind of going back to, like, um, who belongs, right? I think that these soft skills, uh, I think, so this is just my opinion. I like to have engineers, maybe a staff engineer or a senior engineer, someone that is good at it, or has a nice empathetic way about them, to do the technical interview, right? But I'm going to I'm going to give that person the list of um, things that are that I'm looking for from a soft skills, and some ideas about how to test for those things as well, right? So they're doing the technical interview, which is their main job
Mm-hmm.
in that interview, but I also want them to be looking for these soft skills. Then I'm going to probably do another interview with management, and that's going to be looking purely at soft skills. And that's going to look more like a conversation, because that's when I can find things like, how do they, that's how I find out the information, like the person's a bodybuilder or a musician or whatever, and I can make assumptions based on this person's life and how they communicate, etc. And then I don't usually like to have HR on the loop at all. But some companies
I'm going to
require
make
that.
sure Sonatafy HR is not listening right now.
But I think that, you know, um, again, I like to think, if I really am going to go after the top talent, I'm thinking of this interview loop as we're looking at them and they're looking at us. And in the history of the companies I've worked for, there hasn't been very many HR people that I've worked with that would also do a good job of selling the company, right? and they might tell them about the benefits and things, which is good, but they like, I really want someone to sell like how awesome it is to work on the engineering team, and the HR person just can't really speak to that much, and maybe doesn't have the empathy that another engineer would have for the engineer position.
Fair
um
point.
yeah, so I think the other thing, yeah, so that's kind of who I would have do that. um but I wouldn't segment it out into this person should look for this and this. What I would like to do is have everybody look for everything, right? So somebody else might do the technical interview, but when I do my cultural interview, I will still be asking very technical questions to get my idea of, like, do I think this person can help out in architecture meetings and stuff like that, right? So because it's not just are they technical, but can they communicate well these ideas, which is just as important. So I think I like to think of it as everyone's kind of focusing on everything. That's a weird way to say it, but they kind of have a focus for there, but there's secondary things they're measuring as well.
Makes
And
sense.
I think one other thing that's important there is that I don't like the people that are interviewing shouldn't talk about the candidate till everybody's interviewed them. Unless we decided, okay, this person's not going to go on, then we
You're
right.
afraid it'll
But
bias other people's opinions and
yeah,
not let them
definitely. And I
grow in the
definitely see
career.
that happens a lot, right? Like the first person interviewed goes, I really love this person. And then the second person interviews, they come in like excited already, right? And that's not necessarily what we want. We want everyone to form their own opinion. Um, and I think companies have gotten better at that. But it's so easy, especially when you're on a small team, right? Everybody wants to talk about the interviews, and that's probably not the best way to get an unbiased opinion.
So here's another question for you, Gar. So at Sonatafy, we hire top tier software engineers out of Latin America who typically their native language is Spanish, but they're all fully bilingual in English. And one of the things that I think was hard for me to accept over the many years working with these talented individuals that is sometimes it takes them a few seconds longer to respond in English versus if they were responding directly in Spanish, they'd be able to respond right away. And usually when
Mhm.
it comes to more of a problem solving or complex item, what are your thoughts on this? And when you're interviewing bilingual individuals and how you kind of change or look at things a little differently?
Yeah, I think that's really a matter of patience, and really, um, most of our clients have multiple people that are, English is not their primary language, and so hopefully they're good at that as well. But I think that for me, it's about maybe, when I'm describing a complex problem, maybe I have to describe it a couple of times, etc., and do some clarification, especially where words have several meanings, and just make sure that we're clear on the problem, and then giving, as a leader, or an interviewer, right, you should always be patient in letting people think out their answers, right? I think one of the things that I learned early was, when you get promoted and then you go to an architecture meeting, you need to not talk until everyone else has given their opinion, because once you give your opinion, nobody else wants to, right?
Yep.
And so um it's just take that same attitude into an interview, right? Like, I'm going to just wait until this person tells me all the things that they think, and then I can respond. And so it just takes a little bit of patience. Um, and that the more you practice that, I found that the lag time kind of goes down, right? They get more comfortable with kind of spitting out their ideas than cleaning them in the language, right? And then if there's a language problem, then we can kind of change that or fix that, right? Instead of they're trying to form their ideas perfectly.
And to our Nexus community of over 13,000 engineers in Latin America, that's probably the number one tip we keep reiterating that, hey, when English is your second language and you get confused or you have a complex thing, sometimes people have a tendency to try to rush through it real fast and just get to the next one. Where we
Yeah.
say, take a deep breath, pause, and think about your answer and respond. And that people are trying to see your thought process and how you think through it. And you bring up great points of having the right patience and making them feel comfortable. to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think that is it can be hard to do that sometimes when you're in a meeting, right? And there's like, 6, 7 people, and everybody's just kind of talking, and then you're trying to gather your thoughts. By the time you put that together, they're on to the next subject, right? And so I think it's okay in that situation too to be like, hey, I have something I want to say here. And so you get into your spot on the meeting, right? And then you can think for a second before you say what you want to say. But yeah, it is it's something that's again about, we want to work with these Latin American assets because they save money and they help us with, they're really good engineers. But to get the most out of them, then we have to be empathetic that they're having to, make that translation and just taking that. It's not like waiting a long time. It's like 2 or 3
Yep,
seconds.
exactly.
But
Gareth,
speech can sometimes seem like a long time. Yeah.
we're running out of time. Any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I think just like everything else, I think the most important thing in hiring is your mindset, right? So if you say I have hiring figured out and you're not constantly improving it, well, that's a problem. But also if you feel like, oh, we're getting lots of candidates, but they're not passing. Like you're probably getting some good candidates. Like you maybe need to look at your process, or also if you're getting if you're not having to convince people to come work for you, but rather you're just getting tons of people that want to come work for you, maybe you're not recruiting, right? Maybe you're just hiring. And if you really want to build the best team, you got to recruit versus just hiring. And I think that hopefully everyone understands what I mean between the two of those things.
And that's a great point. And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and expecting a different result. And if you're just constantly turning down engineers that are highly qualified, sometimes you got to take a look back and take a look at your process, how you're going about it. To your point, remember, it's a two-way street. We do these LinkedIn Live fireside chats every month. If you're interested in being a guest, go ahead and email me. My email is up here, steve.taplin@sonatafy.com. Certainly, if you want to learn more about our company, feel free to visit our website. And to wrap things up, as Garth talked about, hiring great engineers isn't just about finding it, it's about recognizing it. And we got to remember, in this world of AI assisted tests, remote interviews, fast moving teams, the old playbook doesn't work. You got to change, you got to adapt. The companies that win are the ones that adapt and evaluate smarter. Everybody else just keeps guessing. So take what you've heard today, question your process, rethink your metrics, and raise the bar, because the future of software development doesn't wait, and neither do you. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Garth, thank you for yet another phenomenal fireside chat. And with that, we're going to close out the stream. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you.